Governor Pawlenty with us, which I hope you share my enthusiasm for the opportunity to hear what he has to say. And it's my pleasure to introduce Mrs. Pawlenty.
Thank you. Well, good morning. I'm actually going to move this because I know my husband will do it in a minute if we don't get this out of the way. So I also want to be brief because I'm sure that you are here to hear more about him and his policies, his vision for the country, a little bit about his background, and ask as many questions as you possibly can of him. But I would like to tell you a couple of things just briefly about our family and give you a couple words about him that perhaps he may not mention him.
Well, good morning. Thank you for coming. Since it's a small room, I'll dispense with the microphone. Mary's going to go catch a plane in a little while, but I want to say thank you to her for being on this trip and being such a great part of this campaign. She's going to make a fabulous First Lady for America, and she can't come on all the campaign trips. She's been with us this week, and the reason she can't come on all the trips is because we have 2 teenage daughters at home. One of them is 18, one of them is 14, one of them drives, and they both like boys, and so they need supervision. So she's not always able to come, but we're glad that she's here today. And honey, thank you so much for those kind words and for all of your love and support. I'm running for President of the United States because I love America, and this country's in big trouble, and I've got the skills and the experience and the ideas and values to lead it to a better place. And before we talk about the leadership and the direction for the country, where we need to go from here, it's important to just reflect for a moment on how we got into this mess. As you'll remember, we have a President of the United States who came through Iowa and campaigned across the country and made very large promises about what he'd do for the nation. And he's broken almost all of those promises and led our nation in a very dangerous and misguided direction. We now have a country that he's presiding over with nearly $4 a gallon gas. We have crushing levels of unemployment, 9% or so, and it's been as high recently as 10%. We have a federal government that's out of control, has debt and deficit levels that are suffocating the country. We have a government now that has gone so far, and it's overreach. As one example, it's telling private companies where they can and can't do business within America. We have a country now where we have an unconstitutional health care plan that was thrust upon us by the President and his friends in Congress, and on down the list. We have an economy now where people are hurting. They don't have access to jobs. They're unemployed. They're underemployed. They're not able to take care of their families or to realize their American dream. So we need a new and better direction for the country. And to accomplish that, we're going to need a new and better president. Barack Obama came through Iowa and a lot of other places, and he made big speeches, soaring speeches filled with this great rhetoric. But now we realize the mistake that was made by the country that elected him president, the people who elected him president. He wasn't ready to be president. He hadn't run anything. He hadn't functioned as an executive. He was a college professor. He had been in the United States Senate long enough to have a cup of coffee before it got cold. And then we put him in the Oval Office and wonder why it's not working. Well, one of the reasons it's not working is because we put somebody in the office who wasn't ready to be President of the United States. And we need to make sure we don't make that mistake again. And then we also put somebody in the office who has a very misguided and misdirected direction for this country. He believes in centralized planning. And we know that doesn't work. What we know works is what Ronald Reagan and many other great conservatives taught us, and that is free markets work. And freedom works, and not Barack Obama's plan. He doesn't really even have an economic plan. What he has is a campaign plan, and he continues to put things forward out of political expediency. So we need to get this country moving again. And when I announced my campaign in Des Moines, Iowa not long ago, we said we're going to tell the country the truth. And we labeled the speech the time for the truth. And there's no hard truths that have to be told. We have to look each other in the eye and identify the real challenges facing this country and put real solutions on the table and specifics. Not to scare people, but to make sure that we lead and to educate and mobilize and raise awareness and get this country moving in a common sense, conservative direction. So we said even in Iowa there's going to be some hard truths. And if you're running for president and your campaign starts in Iowa, it's hard to say these truths, but they need to be said. They included the call to phase out ethanol subsidies over time. And I wasn't just picking on ethanol. We're going to have to look at all the subsidies. We're going to have to look at reducing or eliminating most of the subsidies going forward. We have such a big problem in this country financially that it's not about cutting billions of dollars. We're going to have to cut trillions of dollars over the next coming years. And then I went to Florida and talked to seniors and the next generation of leaders about what it's really going to take to fix Social Security. I went to Wall Street and told the bankers to get their nose out of the public trough, their snout out of the trough, because they got it in there as deep and as bad as anybody else. And no more carve-outs, no more bailouts, no more handouts, no more special deals for them. Then I went to Washington, D.C. and told the federal employee unions that you can't get better compensation and benefits than the people who are paying the bill, namely the taxpayers. And on down the list, the point is, too many people, too many groups, too many special deals have littered the tax code, have junked up our spending patterns in a way that we're going to have to restructure and get this country back on track financially. But it can't just all be about cuts, obviously. It's also going to have to be about economic growth. We now have an economy that's sputtering, it's barely growing at all, 1.8%. You can't solve 9% unemployment with 1.8% economic growth. We need exceptional growth, above average growth, bold growth. So I went to Barack Obama's former place of employment, the University of Chicago, and gave the most specific, aggressive, and forward-leaning speech on how we're going to get the economy moving of any candidate in the race, including the President of the United States. And I won't go through it all, but it's on Pawlenty.com if you have a chance to read it. But the highlights are these. Take the corporate tax rate and cut it from 35% down to 15%. Have a flat, simple tax for businesses in this country, and then clean out all the special deals and credits and deductions, or as many of them as possible in that federal tax code, so that your ability to compete depends on your ability to connect to customers in the marketplace, not your ability to connect and influence congressmen and women and get special deals from them. Then number two, get to a flatter, simpler individual tax code as well. Shrink the 6 brackets down to 2, 10 and 25%. And then do the hard other work of getting this economy moving, which does regulatory reform. Make sure before we put any new regulations into law that they're sunset so they don't go on forever, 3 to 5 years. Also make sure before they're finalized and go into law, they come back to Congress for one last up or down vote so average people who actually know what they're talking about as to the impacts of these regulations can have one more crack at their elected representative before these regulations get dumped on their head and get visited onto the economy. And then let's make sure we have an energy policy in this country that has 3 words that lead it. More American energy. So we get our energy from this country and we reduce costs and price by increasing supply. And that's an all-of-the-above approach. And then let's have a health care plan that really fixes health care. Not the government-centric, unconstitutional, top-down, bureaucratic, one-size or limited-size-fits-all vision of Barack Obama where he's going to tax you more and have another government program that's going to run into the financial rocks in the not-too-distant future. Let's fix health care with a focus on individuals and on markets, and let individuals be in charge of their health care. And if they need help because they're financially distressed and we can afford it, let's give it to them, but let's give it to them directly, not run it through some big bureaucracy. And then let's also make sure that we do the work of getting the economy back on track, not just through energy and health care and the like, but let's also make sure that we have a policy that says we're going to have an economy that encourages entrepreneurs to get businesses starting and growing. And when I travel the country and talk to business leaders, and I do this every day, they say, look, you got to get the government off my back. You got to make the load lighter, not heavier as it relates to these things. You got to do things to encourage me, not discourage me. You got to do things to make it more likely that I'm going to grow and invest and add jobs and expand the economy. And then I would also just say one other thing. We got to get the spending under control, as you know. We got a federal government that's spending $40,000 a second that it doesn't have. If you're here for an hour this morning, they will spend $144 million that they don't have just in the hour that you're in this room this morning. They do that every hour, every day, every week, every month, every year. It is out of control. They take in $2.2 trillion and spend $3.5. $1.5 trillion in deficit last year, $1.5 trillion in deficit or so this year, and trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see. They're running a Ponzi scheme, and it's going to come crashing down. And we can't allow that to happen. You can't run your family like they're running the government. You can't run your business like that, and we can't let them run the government, the country like that anymore. Just because we follow Greece into democracy doesn't mean we follow them into bankruptcy. And that's where we're headed. Now there's a lot of issues here, and I won't go through them all because I want to leave the rest of the time for questions, but I want to leave you with one final point. That is, every Republican candidate's going to come through town and they're going to tell you many of the same things. If somebody else were standing right here, they'd say, look, I'm for cutting taxes, I'm for reducing spending, I'm for school choice that focuses on parents, not on bureaucracy, I'm for health care the right way, like we did in Minnesota, private, not government, I'm for public employee compensation reform to make it look more like the private sector, I'm pro-life, I'm pro-traditional marriage, I'm for pro-economic policies that will get the private economy going, not the government going, and down the list. The interesting thing, I think, for you is not whether the Republican candidates can all get up and spew out those words, because they all can. That's what Barack Obama did. It's words. The question is, who's actually done it? Who's demonstrated the leadership and the experience and the record of doing this under difficult circumstances, leading a large enterprise as an executive to conclusion and results and accomplishment in these areas. Because we've had enough of the fancy speeches, we've had enough of the hollow rhetoric, it didn't work. We need somebody who's going to lead this country, who's got the kind of skills and capabilities and record of results to get it done. So our tour in this bus that we're driving around in is branded a road to results. We don't need more rhetoric, we need results as a country. That's what I delivered in Minnesota, taking spending from historic highs to historic lows, cut taxes net over 8 years, even though we had 2 recessions. One of the first states in the nation to offer statewide performance pay for teachers rather than seniority pay, healthcare reform the right way, no mandates, no government takeovers, public employee compensation reform before it was cool and popular, including one of the longest transit strikes in the country, one of the best pro-life, if not the best pro-life records in the country, co-author of the Defense of Marriage Act when I was in the legislature, appointing a conservative majority on the Minnesota Supreme Court for the first time in the modern history of the state. So again, I ask you, and I respectfully ask you for your support, not based on words, but based on results. And I want to just say we can do this. It's not going to be easy. The path forward is not complex, though. We know what made this country great. It's not a mystery. You can look back over our history and see the values and principles that got us to be the greatest nation the world has ever known. And it's not about government, it's about freedom for individuals and what that means in terms of individual responsibility and industriousness and creativity and care for one another, not through big bureaucracies, but through big hearts and a big work ethic. And the spirit of America is not the spirit of our government, it's the spirit of our people. And we need to make sure that that gets unleashed and that people are free and have a sense of confidence and hope in the future. They don't have that now under this president and this administration. So I look forward to your questions, but we need your support. Ames is coming up soon on August 13th. It's going to be a Saturday, and it's going to be a big event, as you well know. We'd like you to come. We'd like you to support our campaign. We'll get you the information, get you there, and I'll make all the arrangements. But we want your support. And the reason we need your support is because Iowa, of course, through the Ames and through the caucuses, is going to have a lot to say about who our nominee is. And Iowa doesn't want to just be first. You want to be right. It's not much of a consolation prize to pick somebody in Iowa who can't really be the nominee, who can't really beat Barack Obama, and who can't really function as President of the United States in one of the most historically challenging times in the country's ever known. So I ask you respectfully to make sure that you put somebody forward, slingshot somebody out of here that can meet all of those criteria. Otherwise, we don't want somebody who's just interesting to Iowa in that moment. We want somebody who can win and lead the country to a better place. I can do that, and I hope you'll support us. Thanks for listening. I'll be happy to take your questions. Yes?
Robert, thanks for being here. As basically a first-generation Iowan, I was born and raised out west. This is a pretty amazing process, and so to be able to have access to candidates like this is pretty unbelievable. But my question is involved with the debt crisis that we have going on, and a lot of news broke yesterday about the Gang of Six, and at this time where we're trying to figure out what type of proposal is going to be, what type of bill is going to be accepted by the president, and what type of bill are the two parties going to be able to come together and produce? At this point, it seems like there's going to be concessions made on both sides. So if there were some type of concession to be made, what is acceptable for the Republican, the Senate and the Congress? What's an acceptable concession to make so something can get done here?
This balanced budget amendment, of course, is a proxy for a lot of the frustration and a lot of the concern about the government's finances, like I talked about earlier. Let me just step back and then I'll answer your question. But by way of context, we have to understand how we got into this mess. And if you look over the last 10 and 20 years, and by the way, both parties have had a hand in contributing to the mess that we're in the Congress, in the White House, and the like. So let's make sure we acknowledge how we got here. But it's also true that this president and the Pelosi-Reed Congress made it exponentially worse. When President Bush left office, the deficit was about $500 billion, give or take. And now last year and this year, it's about $1.5 trillion. So Barack Obama in March of 2009 said he was going to cut the deficit in half in his first term in office. He tripled it. He tripled it. So, but as to your question, if you look at government revenues over a period of time, you'll see that government revenues have kept pace with the growth of the private economy. But government spending has gone up way beyond that. So when people talk about, well, what's a balanced solution? A balanced solution is not just defined by what do the Republicans think now and what do the Democrats think now at some middle point. You got to look at what's the nature of the problem. How did we get here and what do we believe? So we don't govern by polls. We don't govern by just some random sense of putting a dot in the middle. We got to analyze how we got here. And we got here not because taxes were too low. We got here because government spending went crazy and went up way beyond the way beyond the growth of the private economy. So I don't buy this notion that we're just going to find some, split the difference between the two perspectives. My approach was, in January or February, I wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post, and it said this: don't then take the false choice between default and raising the debt ceiling. Order the Treasury by presidential action or congressional bill to sequence the payments so that there would be no default. Pay all the outside obligations first so there's no technical default, and then pay the military and so on down the list of priorities using the existing cash flow. Now eventually the money runs out, but the money runs out on programs that are, we can have a legitimate debate about whether we're going to fund them at a certain level or not. But you don't have a default. Now they chose not to do that, and the reason I suggested that is because they always say, oh, we don't have enough time to do the big reform. It's our back's up against the wall, the deadline is here. Well, this would have bought them much time, and back then they were saying the default deadline was going to be April or May. Then they moved it to June or July. Then they moved it to August. So they did have 8 months, and they could have had even longer if they would have done what I suggested. And these ideas about how to really fix the federal government, none of them are new. They've been around for 20 years. They've all been think-tanked, white-papered, researched, seminar, debated, talk-showed, discussed. I mean, all the issues aren't, it's not a mystery what the options are. The question is, do the members of Congress and the President have the fortitude to do any of them? And that's what we're finding out right now. So after my initial idea didn't work, then I signed on to what's called cut, cap, and balance, which is to say long-term, I don't believe anymore that regardless of which party we send people to Washington, D.C., that they're really going to balance the budget. We've watched this over a long period of time, and they never do for the most part. So I think we have to put some rules of the road out for politicians or some guardrails and make sure that we have a balanced budget amendment to the U.S. Constitution. I think that's the only way long-term we can be assured that they'll live within their means. That's the long-term answer. I would also peg that as a percent, spending as a percent of GDP, and then in the near term get as much real structural spending reductions as you can. That's the cut part. And that's what I hope that they'll do. The House passed that yesterday. Doesn't look like the Senate's going to pass it, unfortunately. So they're going to have to figure out, Plan C or Plan D, and I don't know what that is. The Gang of Six plan, I tried to find out about it this morning, but there's no details available. There was an earlier Gang of Six plan that had tax increases in it that I didn't like. So I don't know what this one is, but if it's like the old one, I don't think that's going to cut the mustard either. But you should know they've already blown the debt ceiling. They blew it in May. The debt ceiling's $14.3 trillion, and they already spent 14.5 or 14.6, and now they're shuffling money around internally to pay the bills, but they've already gone through the 14.3. They're through it. Yes, sir.
How do you feel about free trade?
Well, I'm a supporter of free trade, but I'm not for being a chump. And, you know, we got a lot of countries around the world that cheat. So if the rules are fair and the playing field is level, I'm for it. But if the rules are, you know, we're chumps and everybody takes advantage of us and steals our businesses, I'm not for that. I'll spare you the long answer, but you should know that, you know, there's countries around the world that say, what's your name, sir? Bruce. Bruce. You know, let's say you're going to do business in China and Bruce has got a business that's of strategic interest to the country of China. They say to Bruce, hey Bruce, where's your Chinese plant going to be? Bruce, how many Chinese are you going to employ? Hey Bruce, how much Chinese capital equipment are you going to buy? Hey Bruce, do you got some technology that you have? Because we'd like to see it. And by the way, as a condition of accessing our 1.5 billion consumers here in China, meet your new technology partner. What's your name? Britain. Britain. Bruce, here's your new technology partner. And yeah, welcome. And by the way, if Britain steals your technology and is down the street competing against you in 7 years with most of your former senior management team as his new employees, too bad for you, Bruce, because we don't enforce intellectual property laws in China. Now, we wouldn't do this, but imagine if we turned the tables on them and said, oh, welcome to America. You want to do business and access our 300 and some million consumers here in America? Welcome. What's your name?
Joy.
Joy. Welcome to America, Joy. Joy, where's your American plant going to be? Joy, how many Americans are you going to be employing? Joy, how much American equipment are you going to buy? But Joy, do you have some technology? Because we'd like to see it. And Joy, meet your new American technology partner. Your name is
Ruby.
Ruby. You and Ruby are now in business together. And by the way, you know, if Ruby competes against you down the road, we don't protect intellectual property rights, so too bad for you. Now, again, we wouldn't do that. It's an exaggerated example. But in many cases, that's sort of how it works. And they're not the only country who does that. And there are other examples of that. But we have to deal with those from a position of strength. Now here's the problem. Guess who our biggest purchaser of our debt is? Besides ourselves, by the way. You know, China. So, you know, they hold over $1 trillion of our debt, and that doesn't count the money they run through Hong Kong, because it only counts as the mainland amount. But, so, by the way, you know who the second buyer of debt was recently, of our own debt? The federal government bought its own debt through something called QE1 and QE2. Remember hearing those terms in it? So they were using their Discover card to pay off their Visa card. Instead of buying their own debt. They may do it again. But China, of course, is one of our biggest purchasers of our debt. And I don't know about you, but it can be difficult to tell off your banker. So we need to be able to come at them with a position of strength. And that means we got to get our own financial house in order. And that's why this debt issue, we don't want the United States of America running around the world with a tin cup in its hand, being a beggar nation. That's not the America I know, it's not the America I want, and I know it's not the America you want either. It's another reason why we better get our financial house in order so we're not so dependent on these other places, and that we can treat them through strength and they respect us. And China, if you go there now, and I've been there several times, talk to government leaders, business leaders, and the like, they think we're a country in decline. And they think we're weakening. And they don't respect that. So let's get our house in order and then make sure you call them on it when they cheat. All right. Who's got yes?
When it comes to spending, the executive branch has 17 some odd departments. They got, you know, energy, education, health and human services, agriculture, council, so many departments. Are there any of those that you would completely eliminate, or at least slash by,
sure,
by a huge amount, like half or more?
Question related to which departments federally would you eliminate? And again, like on all these things, I've got a record. So in Minnesota, we merged departments, closed down agencies. The Minnesota Planning Agency would be an example. And again, all the politicians are going to say these things. We did them. By the way, there's also a local group here in Iowa called Strong America Now. Maybe you've heard about it. So people wear the t-shirts at events, but there's a group trying to organize for the caucuses to get presidential candidates to agree to use something called Lean Six Sigma to make government smaller, leaner, more efficient. I use that, again, not just rhetoric, results and experience in Minnesota. It works. I was one of the first, if not the first, to sign their pledge to sign on to Strong America Now, and look forward to doing that in the federal government. But you should know in terms of where the money goes in the federal government, the pie chart of federal outlays, if you color red the following categories: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the national debt, and a few other entitlement programs, the red part is over the halfway line on the pie chart. And at the rate at which it's growing, it's going to be over the 3/4 line within about 15 years or less. Almost all the rest is defense. There's a little sliver in there for all the other agencies and departments. Agriculture, commerce, EPA, education, parks, prison, all that stuff. But know that in the pie chart, it's a small sliver. So I'll answer your question, but as we think about how do we get this thing fixed, the big money is in the red part. If you believe what I believe about defense, which is we need to maintain it, then if you look at the small sliver of what this gentleman's question is about, that's part of it. It needs to play its role. But the real fix here is you've got to get into restructuring the red part. But as to these other agencies, I think education should primarily be a state and local and parental issue. I think the EPA could be dramatically restructured and give more authority regarding regulatory matters and oversight of environmental matters to the states, not to the federal government. I think the Department of Energy could be dramatically reduced and reformed. I think the Department of Commerce could be significantly reduced and reformed. So those are a few examples. We also have a lot of boards and commissions that are, I don't think, all that valuable, that could be put out of business or reduced as well. That would help, but know that in the scheme of the overall pie chart, all that stuff is about this big compared to the rest of the stuff, which is a lot bigger. Ma'am?
You just mentioned that you signed the pledge to the...
Strong America Now? Yeah.
Yes. That indicates to me you don't have a problem signing pledges.
Right.
I know you declined signing the Family Leader Pledge. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, sure. Well, first of all, I respect the Family Leader and Bob and Darla, and I've spent a lot of time with them. Mary and I have enjoyed their company, and I fully support the policy goals of traditional marriage. Like I said, I was the co-author of the Defense of Marriage Act in Minnesota. I've supported both a state and federal constitutional amendment to define marriage as between a man and a woman. And the National Review Online said I was probably the most pro-life candidate in this race, based not on words, but on actual results, proposing and passing women's right to know, proposing and passing positive alternative abortion legislation, and much more. Appointed a conservative just majority to the Minnesota Supreme Court. Again, everybody says they will. I actually did it. So with all this stuff, as you kick the tires, it's one thing to hear the words, but you can see with me, I actually have done it. But as to the pledge, not Bob's pledge, but the group's pledge, again, I support the policy goals, but I thought the wording of it was really not very ideal. And the way that we stated it when I said we declined to sign it is I prefer to put these things in my own words, and I thought the tone of the pledge was not well done. They got off, they had lots of preamble language, many footnotes, and if you read it carefully, I think you might agree that while the goals were good, which is we're pro-life and for traditional marriage, the editorializing and the tone of it, I thought was not as well done as it could have been, and was, the tone of it was off. Well, a couple of things. First, on Social Security, in the legal world, entitlement means you're entitled to it. Nobody should take you away to it. So some people get offended by the term, and I understand what you're saying, but you mean don't treat it like a welfare program. Treat it like we paid in, and this is our savings account, basically. So I understand what you're saying, but I respect that. In fact, when I talk about Social Security, our proposal is this. If you're on Social Security now or anywhere near retirement, we made a promise to you, we're going to keep it. So for all the obvious reasons. But we also have to recognize the math underneath that. So for the next generation, let's say this young man here, we're going to give them fair notice now that in the future, a few decades from now, there's going to be some changes. And we just have to. I mean, you can look, it's not a matter of right versus left, it's a matter of elementary school math. I mean, the program's sinking. If we don't make some changes, by the way, in current law, there are 25% cuts in benefits if the soundness of the program hits a certain negative level. So if we don't do anything, it's going to be cut. That's why we need to save the program. And what I've said is, we're going to have to tell young people that in the future we're going to be raising the retirement age gradually over time, but we're going to give you plenty of notice now so you can plan accordingly. We're also going to have to say to wealthy people, look, if you're wealthy, you're not going to get the annual cost of living adjustment. You'll get the program, the benefits, but if you're middle income and you're lower income, you'll still get the cost of living adjustment. In other words, we're going to means test the cost of living adjustment for wealthy people in the future. Again, these are not ideal solutions, but these are the things we have to do. And again, you can't tell people that you're going to be the courageous leader and look you in the eye and tell you the truth about the real challenges facing the country. We've got to tell the truth. The truth is the program's sinking. It's going to be cut automatically under current law, and we need to fix it. And it's not easy, and there are no perfect answers here, but it has to change. The same for Medicare and Medicare. And if we're not willing to say it, and we're not willing to do it, and we're not willing to lead with that in mind, and we're not willing to campaign like we're going to govern and govern like we campaign, then I'm just another person up here flapping their jaw. We've got to actually do it this time. That's why we're talking about results. I guess we're getting the hook, so we're going to do one more. Anybody else got another question? Yeah, go ahead.
Last year, you bypassed Minnesota's judicial selection process to put the wife of the chief of staff to the bench. She was very anti-gays. Now, how, as a president, how would your federal selection, be? What would you look for? And would belief in same-sex rights and abortion be a disqualifier?
Well, we put people on the bench who are strict constructionists. And the example that you raised, this is somebody I knew very well and knew personally. So our rule is no ninnies on the court, particularly the higher court. And we want people on the court that we know to be folks who respect the law as written and apply it as written. And I don't want people to make stuff up and put in their own personal views or their political views into the law. And so I want justices who have the restraint and the humility that if the law isn't clear on its face, that they'll have the restraint and the humility to say, it's not my place as a judge to insert my own personal political agenda or political views into the law and push it back to the Congress or the President to clarify it, or the governor or the legislature at the state level. So I want strict constructionists going on to the court, and that's what I appointed in Minnesota on the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals as best as possible. Of course, we have a lot of district court appointments too, but those are the kinds of judges that I want. I want to thank you for coming today. I appreciate it. I know your time is precious, and it's a weekday, and you took time out of your busy day and beautiful summer to be part of this gathering. And again, if you can help us out at Ames, the timpawlenty.com is the website. There are people in the back of the room who have postcards. If you just prefer to sign up today, we can get you there, get you the ticket, get all the arrangements made. But again, before Iowa fuels up the rocket and sends the rocket on its way for whoever they're going to pick for their candidate, make sure it's the candidate who can actually go the full distance. So I don't think it's much consolation for Iowa to be first. It's more important to pick somebody who actually can be the winner of the race and lead the country and get this country back to a better place, and we desperately need it. And I'm that candidate, and I hope you'll support us. Thank you so much for coming.